Good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank you for joining us today for our webinar presentation where we're going to discuss the top 5 reasons we've encountered that cause CRM implementations, upgrades, projects to fail. Your presenter today is going to be Scott Weber. And I just want to mention a couple of things before we get going here. You will have noticed that your line is placed on mute. However, we do encourage you to post any questions you may have to the question pane. And at the conclusion of today's webinar, we would be happy to answer those. If you get something in right at the end and we're not able to get to you or we run out of time, we'll be happy to follow up with questions via email. And as usual, if you think of something after the webinar is over, you can go ahead and reach out to Scott or myself or info@customerfx.com. This will also be recorded, so if you'd like to view it again or perhaps send it along to somebody else in your organization, you'll be able to find that up on customerfx.com within the next couple of days here. But that is all I have, so I'm going to turn it over to Scott so we can get started.
Thank you, Brianna, and welcome everyone. I appreciate you taking the time out of a busy day. I'll promise to make this fairly quick. And this is a little bit of a departure from our typical sort of demos that we like to do. We just thought there might be some value in sharing our 20+ years experience and many hundreds of CRM implementations that we've either been there from the ground floor or have taken over at some point in their life cycle as the company evolves the system and moves partners around, things like that. And it is divided into 5 sort of buckets, I'll call them, but within that, there's a lot of specific details. And I think what's more valuable too is that we're offering solutions here today. So with that, I'll get started. Bria, I just want to make sure you can see my screen okay.
We can.
Okay, so we'll get going. Just sort of as an opener here, our experience has been that CRM systems rarely fail completely, and they don't just suddenly stop working. It usually, when a failure of a CRM system is being described, I really see that as it's falling short of expectations. And to some, that is considered a failure, and I guess I would agree with that as well. Again, very rare that we've had somebody's system just totally stop working for any length of time. Software is pretty solid and reliable these days. It's just very unusual. What we have come to notice is that the problem is that the CRM system becomes a grind over time for users. Again, not a sudden event that made it a failure, but rather a grind. It never met or isn't keeping up with the business needs and requirements. That is what I mean by the grind. And it starts to fall short of expectations of users, managers, or IT support people. It just becomes a burden to keep it going and keeping it relevant. And that is probably predominantly the reason why. And again, I'll get into our specifics as we move ahead here. And I will say that most of the time when we hear that a system has failed or failing, it's actually a combination of many factors that are fueled by the fact that this grind I speak about, which can happen over a long period of time, just ends up in a place where people just want to give up or want to switch to some other platform or stop using CRM altogether, again, which is rare, but it can happen in some circumstances, just not usually. So let's get started with what I think is probably the primary reason, or one of the primary ones, is training. And what we see happening is that when a customer either buys a new CRM system or does an upgrade like Bria had mentioned, and there's a lot of new features or changes that were introduced as a result of that project, training ends up getting treated as an event. We're going to spend an hour or two with our users. We're going to plow through a bunch of content. It's rarely very interactive, and a lot of that's because the people who are being trained don't know what they don't know. So they're doing their best to try to absorb what's being said to them and shown to them on the screen. And that ends up just simply not being effective. There's some statistics floating around that it's something like 20 or 30% of what you learn in a training event, you actually retain, which is pretty low. So we're kind of putting our users in a bad position by believing that event-based training, one event, is going to mean that they're going to be able to leave and be totally productive with the system. That just doesn't ring true with anything, not just software. The other thing that we see happen is the lack of knowledge transfer. And this can typically happen through turnover. And turnover can happen at all the levels, management levels, user levels, and what we'll call IT or support levels, power users, that kind of a thing. There's a lot of turnover that happens, and oftentimes people who have been trained or have, come to be experts and really understand the software and how the users are using it and what the management is expecting, they leave. And the knowledge they've gained over their tenure is not passed on. Not that that's easy to do, but a lot of times we're seeing there's no real attempt to even make a knowledge transfer happen. So you end up with these cycles of starting over, which can be very destructive over time. The other thing we're seeing is management changes cause inconsistent expectations, meaning when we see turnover at a management level, one sales manager might have a certain set of objectives and expectations that he imparts on the sales team or marketing team, but then a new sales manager comes along and he has totally different expectations. So the objectives of what the CRM system is supposed to be doing and how the users are to make use of it can dramatically change overnight with the changing of leadership or management. The other thing that we see a tremendous lack of is documentation and training videos. They may get produced, and oftentimes we're hired to produce training documentation for our customers, and even training videos. We'll record the training, but nobody keeps up with that. The training document doesn't match the design of the software, and certainly videos are not redone or adjusted to keep up with the changing design of the software. That too leaves a gap in a user's ability to even know where to go or how to get the latest information about, what am I supposed to be doing in my CRM system. So that presents a problem. Oftentimes too, we hear that IT support is spread very thin. And when they are the ones tasked with supporting and maintaining the CRM system, they don't have the time or expertise to do that. They are not users of the CRM, so they really can't be relatable to the users and managers. That's not the role or the training or experience that their life journey has taken them on. So they end up being maintainers, and yet oftentimes we see in companies, they are the ones that are given responsibility for the overall success of the CRM solution. That falls to IT, even though they're probably the least qualified to actually hold that responsibility. And usually they're the ones that are spread the thinnest as far as available time to become experts on how should we be using the CRM solution. So that is absolutely a pitfall we see frequently. And this is not a reflection on IT. It just is something that ends up getting shuffled off to them over time. And they see themselves as just maintaining it and not really having a vision that they're being asked to apply when it comes to what else should we be doing or could we be doing with our CRM system, which is unfortunate. So this really speaks to what I'll call a lack of champions or power users. And the companies that we do see that are successful with CRM always have one or more champions, not necessarily that that's what they're getting paid to be, but they're perhaps a power user, somebody in the sales department that just happens to be real process oriented and really understand software and how to make the most out of it and things like that. And the user community ends up sort of relying on these power users and champions being their first line of defense, their first line of information about how to get the most out of the system. But when that person isn't available and then that responsibility falls to IT, that ends up sometimes being deaf ears and nothing ends up happening. So again, it continues this grind process I'm talking about that ends up ultimately being tagged as a failed CRM system. So resistance to change is another one. Again, we see this with net new software that's going in and upgrades or customization projects that we're hired to do. Because there might not be proper training or the system maybe wasn't designed as successfully as it could be, users end up going back to their old way of doing things. They knew how to do it in the old way, or maybe that's some legacy software or a spreadsheet or something like that they were relying on to get a certain part of their business done. They'll fall back to that practice if the CRM system isn't seen by them as having an advantage. And oftentimes that isn't really true. They just haven't been trained or had the time to really get up to speed on the new way of doing things. So now we'll kind of talk about the solution side. We strongly feel that training needs to be an ongoing process with topical events conducted constantly. So training typically is a broad stroke, generic kind of soup to nuts in the can kind of a training experience. That's fine. People need a broad overview to really understand and sort of answer the question of them not knowing what they don't know. So I'm a fan of general overview training, but I also think that over time you have to constantly be offering training on specific areas of the software and specific processes that your company requires your users to do. And oftentimes, as a business partner, we're not the ones in the best position to do that kind of specific topical training for your company. And again, this should really fall to these power users or champions to be responsible for continuing to offer such a thing. Next is, this is pretty exciting. Infor CRM is, in the next release, is going to have an integration to a software solution called Pendo. And Pendo is a live contextual lesson-based software package. It sort of takes the place of the power user I was describing because it allows you to create a live contextual training, sort of a wizard. It's hard to explain, but if you go on and Google Pendo, you'll see what I'm talking about. So you have the ability to, let's say, I don't remember how to build a group. I know I was shown that in training, but that was 6 months ago and I don't remember. So what you can do is you can click on the little Pendo button on the group builder and it'll actually coach you through step by step live in your production system. It'll actually coach you through with pop-up screens and dialogue and little videos that literally show you and hold your hand through that process of building a group. And that whole experience might take 20 seconds. But at the end of it, you'll have a group because it's happening within your live system. So stay tuned for more information about that. I think it's just an amazing use of the technology and sort of is one of the better solutions out there I've ever seen for being really great at training users. And then power users need to keep up with the user requests and issues. We also think is just very important that the problems and issues users are having with the training doesn't fall on deaf ears again and isn't ignored or left to their own to go figure it out, go Google it or whatever to figure it out for yourself. So we do think it's just really important that you always have a power user available as the first line of help for your users. So the next reason is the design. The CRM design is not aligned to business requirements and processes. This is a big one, and we run into this frequently, that the CRM system, maybe when it was initially installed and implemented, you may have invested a lot of time and effort with your business partner to customize it and build it in such a way that it's a perfectly tailored solution to what your business requirements and processes were at that time. But every business is constantly evolving and changing their requirements and processes. However, it's very rare that the CRM system is keeping up with those changing business requirements. So this is what we're talking about when we say the design is not aligned with the requirements and processes. The other problem we see is management loses the ability to connect the dots where the CRM is actually leading to increased revenue. The one and only reason a business owner would purchase a CRM system is to increase revenue. There would be no other reason to do it. If all they thought they were going to get in making such a purchase is that they would break even or lose money as a result of putting one in, nobody would buy it. And so what happens as a result of probably all the things we'll talk about today, if the system goes into, is trending towards a failure, they lose the ability to see that the CRM system is truly driving increases in revenue. And that, in their mind, would then be tagged as a failure. And we do see this often. The other big one we see is that marketing and sales are not working together. Literally every company we work with today has someone, maybe not full-time, but at least part-time, has on their shoulders the task of marketing their company's goods and services. But predominantly what we see is that marketing is not working with sales together for a common goal. In fact, they can a lot of times stand in opposition to each other. And that is a tremendous issue because the whole purpose of marketing is to drive more revenue. And typically in most companies, the way that happens is sales has to become involved with these leads and prospects at some point to really be effective at driving more revenue. So when marketing is off doing their own thing and sales doesn't know what they're doing, marketing doesn't know what sales is doing, that is a recipe for a failure, well, without a doubt. And that's been proven to us over and over again. The next one is marketing and sales don't understand the buyer's journey, meaning they don't know all of the things that a new customer did to ultimately buy something from your organization. They get involved, your company gets involved at the end of the buying cycle, which is a pretty big shift from even 10 years ago, before the internet was really used for this kind of purpose. Most companies don't understand why and how a buyer surfaced from the wild and made a decision to purchase or buy. It's statistically proven that buyers today spend much more time doing what we'll call self-learning or self-knowledge by researching you and researching your competitors and researching technologies and things that lead them ultimately to your door. But if you don't understand what they are doing to get to that point, remembering that they might only reveal themselves as a buyer at the end of this process, you're not going to be able to effectively market and target and nurture people with the right information at the right time and then over time. So if you don't know the buyer journey, CRM is going to become ineffective. The other thing we run into is marketing is ineffective at transitioning prospects to sales. This would be an example of a marketing company is maybe using, MailChimp or Constant Contact or something like that, and they have their own database of prospects and leads. And they are sending out valuable content. Maybe they've got some landing pages floating around out there or driving people to your website. But sales doesn't have any idea of what is going on, nor are they the benefactor of all of these efforts that marketing is making, because marketing doesn't know how to effectively transition warm leads over to the sales department. And then their biggest fear as marketing people is, well, how do I know if sales followed up on it? We've tried that and it falls into a black hole, so I don't know if marketing is even working, because I never know if, a sale resulted from anything we've done. That's a common story that we run into. Marketing really sees their role as not designed to drive more sales specifically. They really see their role as more of a corporate awareness or a product awareness or brand awareness role, which is all true, but they fall short of also buying into the concept that they need to be able to transition these leads and prospects into the hands of sales at the right time, and then continue the nurturing techniques after they have thrown the lead or prospect over the fence to sales. Their job doesn't end at the point at which they turn it over to sales. That's the point at which they need to shift into a more tactical, series of emails or valuable content that's going out to assist sales in driving velocity and improving their close ratio, while sales is driving through, for example, an opportunity or sales process. Marketing rarely gets involved in the sales process at all, and we think this is really hurting your ability to convert to revenue. Okay, so what's the solution? The problem with the design, well, we think it requires you to define and maintain a CRM roadmap and really think about the concept of value engineering, meaning you're going to be thinking about constantly making changes and updates to CRM that are valuable. That's the engineering part of it. You're doing this on purpose. You have an actual plan and justification for things that are on this roadmap, so you can constantly be examining it to figure out what would be the next most valuable thing we could do within the CRM system to make it more impactful for your organization as a whole. We see very few companies that do maintain any kind of written or even spoken of CRM roadmap, which we think is not good. Solving the issue with management not connecting the dots to revenue would be, we often find that making data available and reports available to management that actually gives an accurate indications of how effective the CRM system is being. And this really talks about the beginnings of it all, and that is user adoption. Are they even logging into it? Have they reverted back to old ways of doing things? Who's using it for activity management, opportunity management? What is marketing doing? And so it's almost impossible for them to answer those kinds of questions if we don't make the data readily available to them. So it's understandable why they become frustrated and might view the CRM system as a failure over time. And as far as the buyer journey, we think it's extremely valuable for your marketing team to interview new customers, to learn from them what did their journey look like. And again, not just when they decided to engage with you, but what are all the things they did prior to that event in order to come to a decision that they wanted to reach out to you and perhaps engage in a purchase cycle with sales. So we think interviewing and even asking a simple question, maybe sales can do this too, is how did you hear about us, it's surprising how often that question doesn't get asked, but the answer to that question can be the most valuable thing you could possibly ask of your customers. But I think it rarely happens. And we certainly are huge fans of using an integrated digital marketing solution that ties marketing's results into CRM to ultimately understand whether or not these marketing efforts are actually driving revenue. And there's a lot of great ones out there for Infor CRM. There's Acton, there's Inbox Guru, there's SwiftPage, there's Sales Fusion, and now Marketo is coming on board. So there are lots of integrated solutions so that you have tools now so that marketing and sales can be working together, joined at the hip throughout the whole process. The next one is really data. And this is a big one too, is that oftentimes there's a lack of easily accessible and relevant data. And this could be caused by the fact that there's no integration that exists with your other business systems. It's extremely rare that the only data that is relevant and valuable to salespeople is what is sitting in CRM. It just is not true. There's typically so much more corporate data that could be valuable to them, but is not easily accessible. We hear lots of stories about, well, we send out every month a report that shows our salespeople everything their customers bought. Well, okay, who has time to sit and sift through all that stuff, let alone relate it back to, maybe some phone conversation you're having with the customer right now kind of a thing. We are finding that integrated systems integrated with CRM are almost mandatory these days because companies are using so many purpose-built business applications for different things. And again, this is a big shift. If you looked at the market space 10 years ago, basically every company had an accounting system. That was it. Today, they have all kinds of different purpose-built systems that manage and run other, little niche parts of their organization. But nothing is pulling all that data together in a meaningful way back into the CRM system. We also run into the same issue when we are rolling out new CRM systems for customers or upgrade projects and so forth. They don't take into account that these legacy processes that are being done in other software packages that are not getting transitioned into CRM. A big one we see here frequently, again, let's talk about marketing. Marketing decides to stay with their old or legacy digital marketing solution, even though it has no integration with CRM. I don't understand that kind of philosophy, but because that transition wasn't ever made and never is going to be made, that creates a problem like we talked about earlier. So too many disconnected systems, too many places they have to enter data or update data, and it really isn't just restricted to different business systems. We're in the middle of a project now where we have to have somewhere around a dozen spreadsheets that have to exist and live and be maintained, even though they're in the middle of a major overhaul of their CRM system. A decision has been made that rather than incorporate that spreadsheet functionality directly into CRM, we're going to continue to ask our users to not only learn a new system, but also keep all these spreadsheets up to date at the same time. A recipe for disaster, if you ask me. And as long as those old ways of doing things are available to the users, they're going to fall back on those. So what's the solution? I feel strongly that a two-way integration is not always necessary. Well, what does that mean? When we talk about making all the relevant data available to sales and marketing and customer support inside of CRM, that doesn't mean that the systems have to talk to each other at all. And in fact, a lot of times a better way to do it is not integrating them at all. And so, well, what does that mean? We find that it solves the problem and serves the purpose very well to have simple visibility into other business systems from the CRM. That's all you need. Well, what does that mean? So how do you do that? There are several integrated business intelligence solutions that sit inside and live inside of CRM. Infor just purchased one called Burst. We have advanced analytics. We have the Mingle solution for Infor that presents reports and dashboards live inside of a common screen platform. You can do it with SQL views, iframes into different web pages and things if it's a web application. So these are, relatively speaking, cheap and easy solutions for making available to users data that they could use to do a better job of their job without building complex integrations and copying data from one system to another and writing all the business rules to make all that successful. I mean, if that's the way you need to go, that's terrific. But sometimes good enough is just simple visibility from within CRM into these other systems. And how do you get rid of the fact that they fall back into the old ways of doing things? That means eliminating legacy solutions, deactivating it, deleting it, making it not possible for them to go back to the old way of doing things, I guess would be some simple solutions. So the next one is talking about complexity. Too many features are enabled. The first thing I always hear when I talk to a new prospect about their CRM system, the number one thing on the top of their list is this thing has got to be easy to use. If it's not easy to use, they're not going to use it. I agree. However, when you buy, certainly Infor CRM or Salesforce or Microsoft or whatever it would be, everything is turned on by default. Everything. And so it's sort of like, you know, walking into a giant grocery store to find a dozen eggs when it would have been simpler just to pull into the gas station and buy a dozen eggs, because you can do that in about 2 minutes, or it might take you 10 minutes to even find where the eggs are in a giant grocery store. So you end up this overload of features in CRM, and companies don't make the effort to hide and remove unnecessary features, which ends to confusion and complexity for the users over time. Now, the converse of that would be that it could be missing certain features, but we hear over and over and over that I wish the system had this feature, only to find out it does. They just didn't know about it. Why? Because it was turned off years ago, because nobody needed it then, but they do now. Or they just aren't the kind of person that, you know, hunts and pecks and pokes around and geeks out on software like we do. So they don't push every button and every screen and every menu item and see what does this do, what does that do. So I can't tell you how many times I have a customer come to me and say, man, I wish the system would do this or that, only for me to say, it does. Really? How do I turn that on? Well, let's go do it. So that can be a big part of it as well. We run into that all the time. Now, when we talk about the purchaser, the person who owns the company that made the decision to write the big check and buy the CRM system, they have a propensity to want to leave everything on because they want to get the most value out of it they possibly can. So oftentimes the decision makers or the purchaser will make a conscious decision, let's throw the whole thing at the users and see what sticks to the wall. Let's leave everything on and everything active and let them just sort of churn their way through and fumble their way through the software, and in hopes that they'll stumble across other value-added features or functional areas. I think it's a very bad idea, but that's oftentimes the mindset we see. Software improvements and updates are put off. Certainly Infor CRM every 90 days is churning out new releases of their software. We don't typically encourage everybody to put them all in all the time. Some do, some don't, and I think that's okay. But oftentimes companies will come to us and say, we want to upgrade now, and we're 5 years behind. Well, that turns into a massive overhaul. It becomes a very complex project, a very expensive project, but the users are also put into a mode where the learning curve between what they were using and what they're now going to have to use is dramatically different. So it becomes a giant hurdle rather than little baby steps that would happen over time if you were to put the updates in little by little rather than waiting years and then having to go through a massive upgrade project. So what are some of the solutions? Hide and eliminate as much as possible from the interface. And speaking of Infor CRM, if you're on the web client, this is super easy to do. Everything the user sees and can do is controlled by these secured actions. And so you can easily, as an administrator, make a really nimble system. And what's cool is it's not a one-size-fits-all. So you may have a version of the software for power users that have lots of extra features turned on that a typical new user wouldn't see. So you have the ability to use these secured actions to build these roles, and then over time slowly turn things on or off as is appropriate based on the level of achievement or how much a new user can actually figure out. And so you can be real on purpose building the solution in the interface as simple as possible to get the basic job done that particular user needs to do. And of course, everybody knows Infor CRM is highly customizable and has lots of third-party add-ons and things that are available as well. So I'll say that customizations really fall within the first two bullet points. We see a lot of systems that have old customizations that have long since become unusable and don't align with their business, but they're still there. They don't take them out. Or they have third-party add-ons that don't work, are incompatible, but they're still there. And you get an error every time you click on this or that or whatever. This is the grind again that users get frustrated with over time. Customizations are a great thing when they move you forward as far as aligning the system to your requirements. They're a bad thing when they are no longer relevant to the way your company does business and causing confusion for the users. So we got to get rid of them. We highly recommend starting with basic blocking and tackling CRM features and then adding more stuff, turning more stuff on over time. And talking about the software updates, we love the idea of budgeting for small incremental upgrades rather than the pain, cost, and the amount of upset it causes to your business to have great big, overdue upgrades that dramatically change the user interface. I understand that in some cases it's not practical to take the little small steps, but it's always preferable if it's possible. Okay, here's the other big one is performance. And, this really never became an issue until everything moved to the web. The web is kind of an animal because there's so many moving parts to what ultimately ends up describing the user experience, what they see when the software is being used at their computer, at their workstation, wherever they are. With installed software in the past, performance usually wasn't much of an issue, but it absolutely can be an issue for web-based solutions if you don't take advantage of some of the solutions we'll talk about here next. So don't want to jump ahead, but poor performance is a grind, does hurt user adoption, does cause them to lose enthusiasm for CRM, which does equal eventually a failed CRM system. Poor design, and this really talks about, again, customizations that were created years ago that are no longer relevant, the lack of customizations that support the current business, too many features turned on, too many features turned off. All of these things speak to a design of the software, its current state, as being not aligned with what that user needs at that time. Hardware resources, availability on servers and workstations. This is another big one. Most companies and people assume that because it's a web-based application, that the workstation is not relevant. It can run on a really crappy old XP laptop. No, it can't do that successfully. Even though it is a web application, there is a lot of processing and CPU cycles and memory requirements on a local machine, because there's a lot of client-side code that exists in Infor.CRM's web application. So it is not accurate that the user's workstation is not part of the performance chain, because it absolutely is. Lingering technical issues, again, grind on the users. Every time I click here or do that, I get an error message. Well, we don't know what it is, so you get to just live with it. That's a common answer that we hear. Okay, you could do that. However, it grinds on them over time, and they get sick of it, and they get tired of it. And it adds to the bucket of all the other things that they're complaining and aren't happy with in the CRM, and then you have a failed system. Okay, fine. How do we fix it? We really need to talk about optimization of the entire chain. The chain being starts with the database, it starts with the design of the software, maybe how customizations were built and implemented. There are lots of performance tuning practices that are available. We can certainly help you with that. We're becoming experts at it. Things like turning on web compression for those people that are not sitting on the Ethernet backbone of the system, but are running CRM over the web in a remote office, home office, a coffee shop, a customer site, or whatever. Things like turning on optimization of the IIS box and compression can make a huge difference in the experience that the user is going to get. And again, your business partner, we can help you with all of these things because it is a big factor. Again, a part of the solution is designing the system for efficiency, not complexity. Make it as simple as humanly possible for them to get their basic jobs done, rather than the favoring over complexity. We think is an absolutely huge recommendation. Well, how do you figure out which one of these problems do we have? Well, one of the things is you can monitor the resources on not only the servers, the SQL server, the IIS server, the internet connection, and the user's workstation, but oftentimes customers will tell us we have just horrible performance of our system. Okay, let's take a look at it together. We log in together. Right now, it's working great. How do we troubleshoot something that's not broken? I don't know. So what that really points to is the fact that all these different things that are in the chain, start to finish, end to end, with what the user experience is, need to be monitored over time, not at one time, because you will find that there are huge ebbs and flows in all of these resources, internet connectivity, and things that are happening over time. And there's lots of great software out there to help you do those kinds of things. It's built right into SQL and Windows and things like that. But again, don't just look at the server, because remember, the workstation is responsible for a lot of the heavy lifting. You might have a highly spec machine, but if the user has poor internet connectivity, or they're running 15 other Windows or web-based applications at the same time, all of those are vying for resources on that workstation, and the CRM could be in last place. So the performance they witness is poor because of that. And obviously, we highly recommend you address technical issues as soon as possible so that they don't grind on the users and have them become disenchanted with the fact that they're using a CRM system that they're not happy with. All right, well, Bree, I believe that is everything. So hopefully that was insightful. And I'm just, I guess, curious now as to whether or not we have any questions.
You know, Scott, we don't at this time, but that was a lot of great information to digest. So I will just throw it out there again that if you have any questions after this webinar,